Philippine Mining Club and the Philippine Infrastructure and Construction Club are professional networking forums bringing industries together and creating opportunities for the Philippine mining and infrastructure and construction industries. Networking is about giving, not taking. It is about forming trust and helping one another toward mutual goals, regularly engaging with your contacts, and finding opportunities to strengthen relationships. Networking is a great opportunity to exchange best practice knowledge, learn about the business techniques of your peers, and stay abreast of the latest industry developments. Opportunities like partnerships, invitations to events, introductions, and giving talks and presentations bring challenges that benefit and feed your career, professional development, and personal interest. Gaining the advice of experienced peers is an important benefit of networking.
This is our business. It's where commitment is born. A personal stake in everything we do. Innovation and technical expertise at our core. Responsibility deeply felt. We are relentless, curious, trailblazing, transforming with purpose, helping communities connect, and people thrive, globally, locally. With energy, water, and urbanization made sustainable for generations to come. Because your community is our community. Your challenge is our challenge. And your world is our world. GHD, the power of commitment.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the PICC webinar event. So I'd like to welcome PICC members, marketing partners, and other friends that have joined us today. Welcome to the 6th PICC webinar. My name is Kevin, and I hope that you all have an enjoyable day with us today. I'm just out in the Mallee land in Victoria, Australia at the moment, doing some work, so I thought you might be interested. Just before we get going, I'd like to mention and thank our valued marketing partners, for without these companies' assistance, the webinars would not be possible. Our supporting partners are Oztai Geophysical, Cruz Marcello and Jennifer Francia Law Firm, First Metro Securities, Ollie Consulting. Founding partners are Site Skills Training. Site Skills Trainings offer international recruitment and workforce solutions to companies in the mining and processing, oil and gas and construction industries. Our principal partner today, GHD. GHD has had a permanent presence in the Philippines since 1998, with over 600 professional staff spread across 3 cities in the Philippines. Their main office is in Makati, with 2 other branches in Cebu City and Quezon City. Focused on creating lasting community benefit, GHD leverages on its connected global network of 10,000 employees to provide engineering and environmental management services to key players in the energy resources sector. Our other partner, Prime BMD, offers to their clients services for major infrastructure projects throughout the Philippines and Southeast Asia. Expertise, experience and resources are applied across the industry sectors of transport, water, ports, resources and the energy sectors. We'd also like to mention the media partners that we're affiliated with, and that is the Philippine Mining Club, Lighthouse Club Manila, Philippine Resources Construction Journal and the Manila Times. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to hand you over to Joanne Falcatella, who will say a few words about our MC today. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Kevin, who is coming from the Mali in Victoria, Australia. Ladies and gentlemen, may I say a few words about our MC today? Attorney Roderick Salazar. Roderick Salazar III, or Tiki as he called by friends, is a senior partner at Fortune Narvaza and Salazar FNS. With 34 years experience, Tiki specializes in corporate and commercial law, M&A, projects, mining, energy, natural resources law, arbitration, and real estate and construction. Tiki is ranked as a leading lawyer in the Philippines by several legal directories. Tiki teaches corporate and civil law at the University of the Philippines and San Beda College, Alabang School of Law. Ladies and gentlemen, I will now hand you over to our MC, Attorney Roderick Tiki Salazar III.
Thank you, Joanne. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Before I proceed with our first speaker, I wish to highlight the following. We will be issuing a certificate of attendance to attendees, and you can request a copy from Ms. Joanne Falcatella at the email joanne@picc.com.ph. For your questions addressed to our speakers, please type them in the Q&A or chat box beneath the screen. Please indicate to whom you're directing the questions, and I will read them out to our speakers after all the presentations during the Q&A session. We will hold the Q&A after all speakers have made their presentations. We would like to request everyone in the panel to please put your mics on mute at all times, except when it is your turn to speak. This is to avoid the unnecessary noise in the background. Ladies and gentlemen, today we have our first speaker, Mr. Sandy Gilles, who is a financial analyst and a director of a financial advisory firm called Carillon Partners, which is based in Manila. Working to educate clients of the stockbroker firm, First Metro Securities, Sandy used to teach at university on finance and investments. Ladies and gentlemen, I now present to you our first speaker, Sandy Gilles. Over to you, Sandy.
Thank you very much, Attorney. I shall now share my screen. Here we go. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for the opportunity. I'll just take a few minutes of your time before the main event about GHD. It's my privilege to talk about their shares of stock, because they do have shares of stock, even if they are not a publicly listed company. Yes, they are a private company, and they are not listed on a stock exchange, but they still have shares of stock. In fact, the shares of stock are owned by the managers and employees of the company. And it has a long and glorious history. It was founded by Mr. Gutteridge in 1928, and then he was joined in later years by Mr. Haskins and Mr. Davey. So now I understood why it's called GHD, after the names of the founders. And then it continues to today. It's now a global company with many, many employees, and they're happily still a private company and very productive at that. It all starts in 1928 with the business idea. The proponent starts a business with his capital, and that is usually called the owner's funds. The accountants will refer to it as shareholders' equity. You find that in many annual reports, the shareholders' equity. It's just the owner's funds. And then usually the initial capital, which is shareholders' equity, can be supplemented by others who join forces with you who co-invest. And then there might be a friendly bank who could lend money for raw materials or tools, in which case we now have the components of the total capital raised, which is the equity capital in the beginning, and later on debt capital. Debt can be used for putting up a factory for long term, for a 20-year loan, or raw material loans for 1 or 2 years only. So you see bank loans, you see other investors, you see the money of the founder and the owner. These are also referred to by the accountants as the founder and owner is the majority shareholder. You might encounter that term eventually. And then the other investors are called minority shareholders, but it could all be within the same company. As for the bank loans, they're given the term liabilities. Now, the loans and liabilities are normally used for simply buying raw materials or tools, and they can be paid back within a year or two. Meanwhile, the money of the minority and majority shareholders are used for setting up shop, or shall we say, for putting up a factory, the long-term assets of the company for production. The raw material and the tools, which could be half-finished products or finished inventory, they are normally classified under the term current assets. So you'll see in many balance sheets, current assets refers to cash, inventory, whether finished goods or work in progress. And then the machines and the factory would be called fixed assets of the company. I discovered in their website, they have now 486 million Australian dollars in net assets. So in the context of this chart, you see the lower left-hand side, you have the money of the shareholders. That would be the net assets. It is equivalent to, on the right side, you see the total assets, current and fixed, minus the loans and liabilities, would be the remaining money of the company of the owners themselves. That's $486 million. And that's the money that they have to work with to keep on delivering services and producing goods. Now, the current assets, that is, and together with all the fixed assets, they work together to produce the goods and to deliver the services. And this is the material. These are the raw materials for delivering the sales. After that, you just subtract the costs and taxes, and then you get the net profits. So the sales of GHD are quite healthy. I gather from their chairman that they have 2.2 billion Australian dollars in revenues last year. That's very hefty. And not only that, but it used to be $1.02 billion back in 2011, showing you that it's getting stronger every year, growing bigger and bigger. And that can only be a healthy trend, meaning that all of their services are in demand. So in summary, GHD has shares of stock. It's held by the owners and the employees, and the expansion has been funded internally. And that's why it's still a private company. It generates its own capital for future use, and in so doing, it's more in control of its destiny. The shares of stock have many uses, actually. GHD can give gifts of shares to its managers or employees. So one possible use is as incentive to the managers or employees. And then the company can also use its shares as money. So I'll explain in a while. So in the first case, if the employee is paid a salary, well, then he can also be given a bonus in the forms of shares of stock, because that is a nice gift whose value could keep on rising over time. So you have the option to sell it this year or next year when its value is higher. And number two, if GHD wishes to join forces with another company called XYZ, then GHD can say, I'll give you 100 GHD shares, but then XYZ company, give me all of your shares. And that's how that company is acquired. And I think at some stages in its history, GHD was 3,000 employees strong, and then it acquired companies which had 2,000 employees. And so suddenly the combined company had 5,000 employees. And that's how it grew by acquisition as well as from internal growth. So in summary, it all started in 1928 with shareholders' equity. The company produced its own cash for expansion, and then it used its own shares for buying other companies which were in similar industries for the sake of integration and working together and greater efficiencies and exploiting other markets. Thank you very much for your kind attention. If you like, you can visit my Facebook group on Basics on Stocks and Investing. I am Alexander Gilles of Carillon Partners. Thank you very much and have a good day.
Thank you, Sandy. That was a very interesting take on GHD, and it would be interesting to apply for an employee position in GHD at this time. We are fortunate, of course, to have the CEO for Asia Pacific of GHD, Mr. Ian Fraser, at this afternoon's webinar. And allow me to introduce Ian. He's an engineering consultant with more than 30 years experience. While Ian has spent the majority of his career in New Zealand, he has also lived and worked in the United States for an extended period, and his project work has been in the Pacific, the Philippines, the USA, South America, and Mexico. He has a master's degree in science and a postgraduate diploma in business administration from the University of Auckland. For the last 15 years, Ian has held senior management positions in the consulting industry while maintaining key roles on major pursuits and technical oversight of a significant or high-risk infrastructure projects. Ian is a graduate member of the Australian Institute of Company Directors, AICD, and is currently the president of the New Zealand Association of Consulting and Engineering, ACE. Ian is GHD's Chief Executive Officer for APAC, overseeing strategic growth and operations through the APAC region, covering Australia, New Zealand, Pacific, and Asia. As part of his role, Ian is a member of the GHD Global Leadership Team and is a director of a number of GHD subsidiary companies through the APAC region. Ian is also the executive manager of GHD's Technical Services Program, ensuring its practitioners remain connected across the enterprise, sharing innovation and to bringing the right expertise to the client's challenges. Ian's long association with the Philippines started in the early 1990s, working on the Tiwi geothermal field in Luzon, spanning through his current role as CEO for the GHD APAC region, with the GHD Philippines business being a significant local service provider, as well as underpinning much of GHD's project delivery in Australia, the Middle East, and New Zealand. Ian has 4 adult sons, and along with his wife, loves the outdoors and takes every opportunity when not abroad to spend time hiking, cycling, and kayaking in the South Island High Country. Ladies and gentlemen, I now present to you our keynote speaker, Mr. Ian Fraser. Ian, over to you. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Dickie, for that kind introduction. And Sandy, I'm glad our stock structure was so positive over the years. It's a good story to tell. So thank you for that. Yeah, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to you all this afternoon. I'm dialing in from Christchurch, New Zealand, but and I've got really fond memories just around 3 years ago attending one of your mining club lunches where our chairman, Rob Knott, who a picture flashed up before, gave a presentation of a very nice lunch on the essence of purpose. Now, our purpose, as you saw there before, is together with our clients to create lasting community benefit. And I think there's a real synergy here with the theme of creating economic development and community benefit in today's talk. So I'm really pleased to be connecting with you virtually, and look, I really look forward to getting back up to Manila and sharing one of those wonderful lunches again very soon with you all. So when the opportunity came up to speak about infrastructure and its role in economic development, I genuinely jumped at the opportunity, because I do believe our industry is a really significant junction at the moment. We have the opportunity to really rethink how we plan, fund, and deliver infrastructure. And there's probably never been, I think, a more exciting time, or perhaps challenging time as well, to be involved in infrastructure and construction across the what we'll call the APAC region. I'll refer to APAC a fair bit, and I'm really talking about the Pacific, New Zealand, Australia, and then up into Southeast Asia. So I'm joined online this afternoon by my colleague and our Philippine Regional Manager, Darren Shrives. Darren's sitting there in the background in case we get any really interesting questions around with regard to the Philippines specifically. Now, Darren leads a team of more than 800 practitioners now in the Philippines, so who, as been said, contribute to local infrastructure projects, but also support our operations worldwide. So worldwide, with over 10,000 employees, we consider ourselves to be a small employee-owned global corporation. We provide professional services supporting infrastructure development across the world. As CEO of the APAC region now, including our Australian business, I take a very close interest in the opportunities and challenges that the infrastructure sector presents to our company and the emerging trends that are occurring in procurement, contracting, and delivery models. And I hope my observations will be of real interest to you this afternoon. So in our session, which I should not hold you up for more than about half an hour, I want to explore that the theme of economic and community benefits that good infrastructure provides, before looking closely at the role of infrastructure as a fiscal stimulus, which we hear a lot about these days. I'll then discuss some of the most apparent sort of market opportunities and challenges across the region from my perspective, and look at the importance of long-term infrastructure planning. Finally, I'll touch on the status of the Philippine infrastructure market and finish with how perhaps GHD can assist in the Philippines and abroad. So when we discuss infrastructure, we're typically referring to fixed, long-lived public assets that facilitate the production of goods and services, including transport, water, energy, social assets, and digital infrastructure, most importantly these days, including broadband and mobile networks. Clearly, other sectors, importantly today, including mining, rely significantly on infrastructure and make significant contributions to the economy and economic development. However, for the purposes of this discussion today, I'll be focusing on those infrastructure assets that are accessible to the public and are generally provided by or delivered on behalf of government agencies. So concrete, steel, fibre optic cable, these are all essential building blocks of our economy. Infrastructure enables trade, powers businesses, connects workers to higher valued jobs, creates opportunities for struggling communities, and protects us, importantly, from an ever increasingly unpredictable natural environment. From private telecommunication systems, broadband networks, freight, railroads, energy projects and pipelines, to public spending on transport, water, buildings and parks, infrastructure is really the backbone of a healthy economy. More specifically, without reliable transport systems, communities have real difficulty accessing employment, essential services such as healthcare and education, markets to trade, and hence urban areas do not operate as efficiently or as effectively without efficient transportation systems, limiting the economic potential of the region. The focus on public transport throughout the APAC region, placemaking by connecting communities with transport and making integrated freight transportation more efficient, is generating a really new wave of urban light rail projects, related urban intensification, and rural rail opportunities along safer and more efficient motorway connections. These are all boosting development in the economies in the APAC region in the medium to long term. Beside transport, access to reliable forms of energy is critical for business and communities, and the provision of high value services that rely increasingly on electronic networks. A significant shift to renewable energy is underway across the region, including solar, wind, pump hydro, and green and blue hydrogen more recently. While addressing deficits in available energy in some regions is paramount and therefore clearly lifts economic potential, this also is representing incremental steps to reduce our dependency on fossil fuels in the long term. So reliable energy, without doubt, is essential for positive economic development in the modern world. Access to clean water and sanitation services increases available time for productive activity, reduces time and costs associated with poor health, and supports the many businesses of which where water is a key resource. Utilities across the APAC region have a strong focus at this time on the end user and optimising the planning and construction and ultimately the delivery of services that the public need. Structural reform of aggregation of small water utilities is front of mind in some geographies in the region in order to leverage technical expertise, optimise procurement and access more finance. Sustaining water infrastructure ahead of urban development and retrofitting systems with higher quality infrastructure, reducing environmental discharges and ensuring high quality water remain an important focus for our clients. Water reuse and desalination remain strong markets in the face of population growth and climate change, particularly in Australia. So water continues to consistently support economic growth in both rural and urban areas. Currently, spatial planning for social infrastructure systems does not receive the same attention as hard infrastructure like roads, telecommunications, and water systems, but there is increasing evidence of the health and well-being effects that readily available social infrastructure has, and hence the importance it has to economic output. Finally, ICT, or information and communication technologies, including smartphones and are transformational in providing financial inclusion, market information and commercial opportunities, as well as improving health and education services for vulnerable communities. Fast, reliable ICT is essential for high-value commercial activity and attracting investment. 5G presents the next opportunity to accelerate economic growth through its radically improved speed and capacity. And while some regions will continue to sweat the extensive copper and fibre network assets that they have, the opportunity really exists for developing countries to leap ahead of these fixed networks using 5G in the future. So it's an interesting time for ICT. So I think it's clear that, that all forms of public infrastructure clearly boost economic development. I'd like to now go on to talk about infrastructure stimulus. Infrastructure construction is increasingly being used by governments across the world as the fiscal stimulus to kickstart economies in times of recession. In fact, much of the world at this time seems to think it can infrastructure its way out of COVID weakness. Simply put, infrastructure spending creates jobs in the planning, designing, and more significantly during the construction phase. Infrastructure projects typically take months to years to complete, which means jobs are relatively long-term. Workers spend their income locally and help stimulate the economy, and this is known as the multiplier effect. Once projects are completed, citizens can operate more efficiently using transport and other utilities to improve their productivity and their contribution to the economy alongside their quality of life. So however, how effective infrastructure is as a stimulus to the economy depends on the magnitude of this multiplier effect. To be an effective fiscal stimulus, infrastructure must be timely, targeted, and temporary. Infrastructure projects may take years to get out of the ground, as we all have experienced, due to the implementation lag of consenting, land ownership, etc. This can create a counter-cyclical pattern where spending is held up during the time when the economy is suffering, and then overstimulate the economy when the country is thriving at a latter time. While there may be infrastructure projects ready to be fully funded at a time of need, or so-called shovel-ready projects, there are typically only a limited number of these. In order to stimulate the economy, spending needs to be in the hands of people who will spend it quickly to multiply its impact. Usually this means lower income households and people who are most economically distressed by the downturn. So it needs to be targeted. However, if infrastructure is built solely for the purpose of providing the stimulus, and not because it enables regional national economic development, it can cause significant negative long-term effects if not being utilised to its full potential. Finally, Notwithstanding the ongoing need to address a significant infrastructure deficit across much of Asia, stimulus-focused spending in infrastructure should be limited to the period when it is needed to deal with a recession. Otherwise, permanent increases in deficit spending obviously can lead to unsustainable government debt levels. So in summary, good quality infrastructure should positively influence economic outcomes in the short and long term, though its stimulus effect and long-term regional economic development patterns through its stimulus effect and longer-term economic development patterns. The political benefits of construction activity clearly need to be closely aligned with the actual public need in the longer term. So I'd like to move now to some observations of market opportunities and challenges. In response to a widespread infrastructure deficit and or the need to replace aging infrastructure across the world, record commitments to infrastructure spending are currently being made. To varying degrees, a significant amount of COVID recovery stimulus infrastructure projects are also under construction at this time. New or current challenges with delivering infrastructure efficiently include the following. Money was cheap just a year or two ago, but now inflation in some regions is impacting pricing, with inflation now at its highest point in 30 years in New Zealand, where I'm coming to today. Supply chain issues are causing delays and price escalation, particularly in the vertical infrastructure space. Reduced revenues for some public authorities through takes from their assets, examples such as urban rail networks and airports, is affecting their ability to fund infrastructure upgrades, their loss of income experienced during the COVID pandemic, that is. And of course, we are experiencing an acute skills shortage in some geographies, both in the early phase design and in experienced construction workers. Longer term or more systemic challenges include lagging construction productivity and the potential for more efficiency in the sector, a related siloed approach to delivering infrastructure, which could be integrated much more to give better outcomes, combining road, water, power, ICT, rather than pushing them to market in their current solid form. We do have a challenge in some countries across the region of unreasonable allocation of risk in contracts, which results in projects being more expensive to cover that risk. In general, there's low levels of digital and prefabrication innovation in our sector when compared to other sectors such as manufacturing. And we do still struggle with a tendency for lowest price orientation in procurement. And of course, we do have a chronic skill shortage in our sector. I think as long as I've been in this game, we have been looking for experienced practitioners at all times. Oh, and finally, the increased cost to mitigate against climate change and to mitigate adverse environmental effects has grown significantly. The International Monetary Fund estimated that the infrastructure bill in Asia is currently 16% more than their last estimate due to the need to combat climate change and related effects. So while the solutions to these challenges are complex and are country specific, I've identified some what I'd call transportable recommendations that are available from the Infrastructure Australia report relating specifically to the Australian market conditions, but I think you would find resonate with you in other locations. Importantly, an early focus on people and place is important to get better economic and social outcomes. To get that multiplier effect and synergies in the long term for economic growth, you really need to include people in the discussion and develop a close understanding of the place that you're working in at an early stage, much more than we did in former generations. We need to push forward with a deliberate shift to digitally enabled off-site prefabrication to reduce the cost of manufacturing the parts of our infrastructure and increase the speed at which we can bring it to market. We need to develop multi-infrastructure type or cross-sectional infrastructure investment pipelines, and that is occurring to varying degrees, more so across the region. We need longer-term collaborative contracting models and more integration of the supply chain, bringing key material suppliers into alliances and other models to deliver more efficiently. And greater use of should cost models and standardized contracts. If you haven't heard of should cost models before, they're simply whole of life models that bring to the surface the compromises that are experienced by going with the lowest price when you're looking at infrastructure. They bring the whole of life price to the surface, identifying the compromises you may be making in the longer term. So national infrastructure commissions are increasingly common across the region, including your own Philippine Infracom, who seek to lift infrastructure planning and delivery to a more strategic level, and by doing so improve their nation's long-term economic performance and social well-being. Similar agencies have been put in place in New Zealand and Australia, assisting government to prioritise and publicise infrastructure investment out over the next decade, which allows finance, design and construction players, such as ourselves, to resource up and skill up to meet the demand and to sustain businesses during downturns. These commissions or agencies also advocate with the delivery agencies around changing behaviours and procurement models, etc. In general, successful infrastructure delivery benefits from clear and ambitious infrastructure plans that are shared with the market and allow the market to see the pipeline ahead. Ongoing strengthening of our own procurement and delivery agencies, that's on client side and on the delivery side. Having a positive, innovative approach to private sector involvement instead of relying entirely on government funding. And I think the Philippines has been very proactive in this way over the last few decades. And ensuring that there's a high degree of professionalism in the execution of program management and execution of the projects, really lifting the professionalism throughout the network. So if we look quickly at the Philippine context, you are all very, very familiar with the Build, Build, Build drive, which aims to encourage investment, facilitate job creation, boost economic growth, and improve the quality of life in both your urban and rural communities. My reading indicates that between 2016 and 2020, the investment is expected to reach 7% of your GDP. As shown on the graph on that slide, COVID has had a real clear impact on progress, particularly during 2020, but it's encouraging to see some recovery with that progress. The International Monetary Fund in 2020 notes that the Philippines is amongst the most vulnerable in the world to risk from climate change and natural disasters, resulting in a disproportionate amount of our budgets in the region needing to be directed at mitigation and repair of following these events. This makes it particularly challenging for the Philippines to prioritise new infrastructure while dealing with these events. The IMF also notes that the Philippines is at a similar level to other Southeastern Asian regions in terms of effective management of infrastructure development, but a significant efficiency gap remains to address when compared to best practice. You can see there, so there's some 20% in the IMF's opinion improvement that could be made in terms of adopting best practice. Some of the things that I mentioned in terms of the recommendations of the Infrastructure Australia when looking at its own market. It's imperative to address sustainability in design and construction, as it is a key driver in procurement and finance in the region, and will become increasingly visible as a priority in the Philippines over time. getting ahead of these principles and methods will provide service providers with a key differentiator going forward. And this is an area that GHD has significant expertise and track record. So in closure, I hope I've summarised to avoid any doubt that yes, infrastructure does drive economic growth, and we've traversed many of the opportunities in the sector and the challenges that are to be overcome. Now, GHD is very focused on the infrastructure sector, as I've said, and we'd like to believe that we're recognised as a world leader, particularly in innovative procurement, which is required to deliver these projects, integrated water resource management to make the most of that precious resource, and sustainable urban development, incorporating communities into transportation infrastructure. We're particularly focused on the future of energy, the future of water, and the future of communities that use these resources. And as I said before, we hope to go on together with our clients to create lasting community benefit. So we've had, as been identified in the introduction, a long history with the Philippines going back 20 years, and we're very, very positive about our future in the country going forward. I've been in awe of our own employees and the rest of the business community, the way that you have all managed to get through the last 2 years and its disruption. And I'll just say once again how much I'm looking forward to getting back in country and working alongside you to provide great infrastructure outcomes for your people. So thank you very much, Dickie.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you for that very insightful and interesting talk on how infrastructure boosts economic development. At this point, we are now open to questions from the audience, which you may convey to us through the question and answer box. But before that, may I start with my question to you, Ian? Yeah. In your talk, I believe you mentioned that there are about 5 areas that count as infrastructure, namely transport, energy and resources, water and sanitation, healthcare and community services, and ICT. I wonder if it is possible to rank these areas in terms of importance for a growing economy like the Philippines, and if so, how would you rate them, and why would you rate them as such?
That's an extremely important question, and I'm more of an observer than an expert, I must say. But from researching the topic, preparing for the talk today, it's quite clear that there are some of the infrastructure, delivery of infrastructure is an absolute necessity. So if we start with water, without clean water, we have nothing, right? So, and without sanitation, we have a lot of challenges. So I would put that right at the top of Maslow's triangle. Energy in the modern world, I would, in my mind, has become more important perhaps than transportation. As we've seen, we can actually work remotely, but without energy, we can't communicate and create those higher value opportunities for our people through ICT. So energy, I think I'll put second on that list. And then after that, I don't know, transport is pretty critical, right? You've got to move goods and services around to thrive, and perhaps it goes water, transportation, energy. Very difficult to say. And then when you get to healthcare and social services, obviously they are very important as well. But yeah, it's a good question. I think it'd be an interesting area to research, because it changes over time, and depending what community, the stage of development of the community that you're looking at, whether it's a rural economy or a modern city like Metro Manila. Yeah.
Thank you, Ian. Yes, I would tend to agree with your ranking, and as you are aware, the Philippines is in an election period, and I only wish that some of the candidates would be listening to you now and give your advice on where to prioritize. Perhaps the next question would be that you also identified market opportunities and challenges for the APEC and the North America. I wonder how significant would the effect of the COVID-19 pandemic and perhaps of climate change, as you mentioned it, on these issues that you identified, such as perhaps supply chain and project pricing?
Sure. Well, with the supply chain issues for some parts of infrastructure are really material and real in construction projects that we're involved with. However, the supplies are still getting there, but they are delayed, which is causing the ultimate owner of the project to have to wear significant price escalation. You know, if you're thinking about the water industry, parts for water treatment plants and so on, all rely on international supply chains to get that to your construction site. Steel, in some economies, rebar is a real premium. In some economies, which affects both our civil and our vertical infrastructure, nearly all of our infrastructure. And more specifically, in my own geography, mainly because of our dependency on domestic generation, chipboard and some residential housing material is almost inaccessible. So it really has slowed projects down and had anomalous and hopefully short-term price escalation in that sector. What it has, I guess, the supply chain challenges and changing prices that come from that have stopped some agencies from finalising construction projects until that situation settles down. That's not widespread, but we are hearing some entities in Australia are sitting still and waiting for that supply chain issue and price escalation to settle down so they can fix a price. So that is a bit of a vulnerability to our sector, that we get the ports working and these international supply chains working again, because that's how we get efficiency in the sector and get our prices back down to a reasonable level.
And do you think the Ukraine crisis has contributed to that supply chain issues as well, apart from the COVID-19?
Yeah, look, I think we're lucky this time in that we're somewhat isolated from the direct impact from that conflict compared to our European colleagues. But clearly, the price of petroleum, of oil, has gone through the roof. And for civil infrastructure projects in particular, diesel is one of their biggest line items, right? So our colleagues on the call today from the mining sector, that goes straight to the bottom line. So yeah, I think the Ukraine conflict is having a quite a dramatic effect through oil price. Yeah.
Thank you. And I recall that you suggested very interesting ideas on infrastructure planning in order to have successful infrastructure development, which I think should be adopted by our presidential candidates and local officials in their campaign platforms. But perhaps my question is, how big a factor in a country's economic development and is the government's political will in attaining that success in infrastructure development?
Dickie, could you just rephrase that for me, please? So
how big a factor is the government's political will in attaining infrastructure development success?
Sure. Well, look, in the geographies that I have the pleasure to work, I think it's the central issue in terms of their credibility to put forward a compelling infrastructure pipeline to meet the country's needs and to stimulate economic growth, as we've talked at extensively over the last half hour. But probably more importantly, it's their ability to actually deliver on those infrastructure plans. And we see many a grand plan in many countries, but then we see a change of government often if that government is unable to actually deliver on its promise. So it's not only the developing the strategy, but putting in place really effective agencies to push that out to market, which is where we need to help. I did have the pleasure of sitting down with a finance minister of this country a few weeks ago, and he observed that in this part of the world that we tend to work in the private sector or the public sector, so we don't share that experience and expertise across that boundary very well to get a more efficient relationship. Whereas perhaps in Europe, people shift between working for being a client on the government side of infrastructure and then delivering for a contractor many times within their career. So they're, I guess they have a better understanding of each other's needs. And I think there's something in that for us for the longer term as well. We tend to be quite siloed, looking after our own risks. Yeah.
Right. Well, perhaps in the Philippines, the experience in previous administration is to have a public-private partnership in the development of infrastructure. And perhaps in this regard, we have a question from Graham Deegan, and he says, a great presentation, Ian, and that he has heard that the Philippine Senate is considering a bill that will provide a 30-year infrastructure plan. And he asks you whether GHD and other service companies are being asked to engage in that debate, and that, you know, that 30-year plan, being as it is, would endure many different administrations.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think I can speak on behalf of Darren and I that no, we haven't been engaged in that formulation of that plan or the debate on its on how it could be achieved. It is a long-term plan, and you know, I think that's important, and to obviously it needs to be able to change in response to technology changes along the way. But having a long-term strategic plan that goes beyond electoral cycles, I think, is a really solid strategy for any government.
Right. I suppose the recent development is on the emphasis on ESG, environment, sustainability, and governance. And we have a question from Joey Aison of the Philippine Mining and Exploration Association. And he asks whether GHD considers the ESG track record of companies in taking your clients.
Yeah, thanks. It's a very important and topical question. And yes, we do. You know, when we're considering working with a client, we're looking closely to see whether that client shares our values, and in terms of integrity, safety, sharing respect with each other, and whether there's a good opportunity to actually develop teamwork with them. But specifically with regard to ESG, as we've all developed a more comprehensive understanding about the implications of climate change, we are now selecting projects and clients, or clients in particular, on the basis that we really want to understand that they have a strategy for decarbonising themselves. So we want to help them along that journey. But we really do want them to be looking to that strategy. If they're denying it, it would be harder for us to work alongside them. Notwithstanding that, you know, we also appreciate that many countries, like the Philippines, are heavily dependent upon fossil fuels for energy, you know, for energy generation in terms of thermal coal for power generation in the Philippines, and it is going to take time. So we can't put our head in the sand and think we'll be 100% renewable tomorrow. We have to work with the assets we have and transition over the longer term. Some other countries that we work in, such as here in New Zealand, are very close to being able to access 100% renewable resources because of our relatively limited population and abundant water and river system that we've dammed over the last few decades. So yes, look, we do look closely at the ESG strategy of our clients and look to make sure that we're aligned. Yeah.
Excellent. And I recall in one of your slides that it was identified that the Philippines really is among the most vulnerable to climate change and natural hazards, and thus it is important for us to pursue ESG commitments. And I recall also that in that chart you earlier showed, Philippines ranks below many of the regional neighbors in the quality of their infrastructure. And what do you think explains this seeming inefficiency, not only in the Philippines and but in other Asia Pacific region countries, and how can the Philippines and the
It's quite a confronting graph, that one. I thought twice about putting it up, but you know, it's the comparator is your neighbours, and rather than potentially, you know, Australia, for example. You know, like you will all be much closer to these challenges, but you know, the Philippines is a unique place. I think that's why we all love it so much. You know, the archipelago. It's an incredibly challenging place to link up with traditional infrastructure, given the amount of islands and the natural hazards that you have to traverse as well. So, you know, I guess my perspective on it is that the transport network around the Philippines has had to be perhaps not as high a quality, but able to be replaced. and agile over the years, and it's only of recent that we're starting to build really modern networks that perhaps can withstand some of these events. The population growth that you've experienced in Metro Manila over the last 30 years since I've been traveling to the Philippines is remarkable, and while that's not significantly different, I guess, to what in Jakarta and cities like that kind of intensification, of course, makes it very difficult to retrofit major transportation infrastructure as well. So it's complicated. You know, you have lots of individual land ownership parcels, which I'm very familiar how difficult that makes it to put linear infrastructure in place. So yeah, I think those are some of the challenges that you know, you don't have a lot of space to work with. You get a lot of people. It's hard work. Yeah.
Very true. Yeah. Well, with only 2 months left before the present Philippine government steps down, top officials would claim that the government is successful in ushering what they call a golden age of infrastructure, which was promised by President Rodrigo Duterte when he unveiled an 8 trillion infrastructure program at the start of his tenure. And at the same time, however, the Department of Public Works and Highways revealed that only 12 out of 119 infrastructure flagship projects were completed to date, which is about 1.4% of the 5 trillion total cost of investments. In terms of rating how successful a government has achieved in infrastructure development, what do you think should be the factors in doing so?
Obviously, the numbers, when you, as you stated, are pretty challenging in terms of actual completion. But I think that's a problem that's shared by many countries and successive governments. The challenge of actually implementing infrastructure is real. The complications that especially linear transportation infrastructure. So you know, as I said before, I think when we're looking at success, it's not only about developing the strategy, but being able to put in place agencies to be able to deliver on infrastructure. And I just hope that, you know, across Asia and in New Zealand in particular, we're not very good at it either, that we're learning and are prepared to take on new, more collaborative approaches to enable us to move faster with this infrastructure deficit that we have. Yeah.
Thank you. I see in your background the words, the power of commitment. And I'm guessing this is the mantra of your company, GHD. And I noticed in your last slide that you said that together with your clients, you will create lasting community benefit. And I suppose this particular effect on the community is quite an important aspect of infrastructure development. So how do you rank this in terms of getting the projects that you are engaged in?
Yeah, look, I think creating lasting community benefit is an expectation that we expect out of the projects that we get involved with. I think we're fortunate because of the type of clients that we all interact with, that's a central objective of nearly all the projects that come to us. But there will be occasion where a project is going to be detrimental to communities to the extent that we may not pursue it. So yeah, it's something that's very important to our people, that resonates with them, and I think increasingly as people, young people choose to be engineers and scientists and planners, that construct of actually creating community outcomes with real physical assets is really, really compelling for people joining our industry as well. Rather than just being good at maths and physics and all those things, it's actually been able to create real things that are good, that provide community outcomes. So I think it resonates with us, but I think it resonates with the industry as well. The power of commitment is really a nod to our longevity and our private ownership, and the fact that when we commit to a project, it's our resources, it's the employees' resources that we're deploying, and we'd like to think that brings a special level of commitment to our client relationships. Yeah.
Yeah. Allow me to shift a question to Sandy from that point of a company being owned by the employees. How advantageous is that arrangement, Sandy, rather than being listed in a stock exchange?
Oh, many advantages, because you control your destiny, and you have less reporting requirements to many outside agencies. Like you need to send less reports to stock exchanges and the like, but you still have the same level of compliance and risk management scrutiny from the internal board members, except that you're just not burdened by so many reporting requirements. Sometimes public companies have to send the same report to 5 or 10 different agencies in various forms. It's like they have to have a whole department for sending reports,
Right.
and it's a burden. And also, there's a lot more latitude for decision making, for moving left, moving right. If you were a public company, you have to check with various agencies or regulators whether this is allowable or not.
Right, and perhaps in the context of the Philippines, you were talking of the stock market a while ago. How big is the participation of the public sector or the public companies in infrastructure development? How many listed companies are there that would be involved in that aspect?
San Miguel Corporation shifted many years ago from beer and food making to building airports and power plants. And Ayala Corporation is also significantly in AC energy. And we have a number of listed companies in construction. So I dare say that they feel that it's the next sector where services and products will be in great demand. And so kudos to the high-tech and best engineered solutions, and also those who can anticipate the needs of a province or a region ahead of time.
Thank you, Sandy. Ian, let me shift back to you. And I note that GHD is focused on the future of infrastructure and is recognized as a world leader in innovative procurement, integrated water resource management, and sustainable urban development. And also in ranking the areas of infrastructure, you mentioned that water is top priority. We have a question from Joey Aison, and he is wondering whether GHD is involved in helping our local companies, water companies, Manila Water or Maynilad, to improve their capacity to deliver water to the people. And if so, how would you rate these companies?
Well, yes, look, both Manila Water and Maynilad are long-standing clients of ours, and of course, as a good consultant, I would not say anything to the contrary that they are they're good clients. They have, you know, a significant challenge on their hands to keep up with population growth in a highly urbanized environment, and you know, we're very pleased to be supporting them as they bring projects to the market. And it's been that relationship's been a really important foundation of our presence in the Philippines. Yeah.
Thank you. I don't see any other questions, but hold on. I had a question on the key recommendations from Infrastructure Australia for the infrastructure sector. And you mentioned a greater use of a term which is new to me, should cost models.
Yeah.
I wonder if you could expound on this further and what the current level of use of such model is for developing economies like the Philippines, for instance.
Yeah, like it's only recently come to my attention, and there may be others that are much more familiar with it, but literally I like it as what the project should cost. So a should cost model, though, takes into account the full life cycle of the asset. So why Infrastructure Australia is encouraging that kind of cost estimating is that it very clearly illustrates if you spend less at the beginning, where you might end up spending it in terms of maintenance along the journey, or repair in the event of a cyclonic event or so on. So it allows the asset owner to look at how they spread their expenditure over time. And the hope is that it detracts from people being attracted to the lowest price at all times, if in fact there's cost coming around the corner. So it just gives a little more clear visibility of the cost over the life of the asset.
Thank you. From the, I believe that there is a question on, from a GHD perspective, what are the advantages and disadvantages of the Philippines compared to other Asian countries? And I believe your colleague from the Philippines, Luan Cruz, would like to answer this question live. Luan?
Apologies, sir. I think Ian is in a better position to answer that.
Oh,
okay.
Okay. I was interested to hear your answer, Luan, but look, I think one of the Philippines is a successful nation, has had strong GDP for many years now, and has the quality of life and opportunities for Filipinos has been changing all the time. And that, in my mind, my humble opinion, that comes down to a very strong work ethic and a culture of doing what needs to get done to work, and that work ethic that you see in the Philippines and you see around the world. The Filipino people are also very creative, so that helps with innovation as well. English from our corner of the world is a massive asset. The fact that we can so easily communicate, whereas many of the neighbours in Asia, it's much more a significant challenge, which can lead to misunderstanding when you're trying to work, and the common language makes it a great place for countries like Australia to work closely with, just the culture, a lot of the cultural alignment and that work ethic, I guess, has been resulted in it being a great experience for us. We're learning all the time and wouldn't like to pretend we fully understand the country, but it's been a very positive experience for GHD and a successful experience. Yeah.
Thank you for that very favorable evaluation of what the Philippines presents. We actually don't have any further questions, and I invite you, Ian, to have your closing remarks at this point.
Oh, well, thank you very much. So look, I do hope that some of the recommendations that agencies are putting out are interesting and maybe be able to be applied in the markets that you're all considering. I do genuinely believe that we're in the right sector. to make a real difference, going forward. But the challenges are real, and particularly with one of the key ones is the skills shortage that we're experiencing really internationally in technical areas such as engineering and infrastructure. So look, I encourage everybody to celebrate the industry that we're in. That's what I'm trying to do here today, so that we can get that supply chain of young people coming, you know, those great minds coming into our industry in the Philippines and elsewhere. They're the ones that will bring the technology with them and will lead to all that innovation that we so clearly need to bring projects to market faster. So yeah, I think I'd just be proud of the industry we work in and share that. Yeah.
Thank you, Ian, for your encouraging words to our audience. And I thank you as well for a very interesting talk over the past hour, where you discussed the economic outcomes, the infrastructure stimulus, and the observations of the market, as well as your take on infrastructure planning and your very candid view of the Philippine context and what the GHD offers in terms of its projects in the Philippines. And I just hope that the Philippine government, the incoming one, avails of your services, as well as those companies that are in partnership with the government in pursuing a public partnership, a private partnership in an effort to develop infrastructure in the Philippines and hopefully in the Asia Pacific region as well. So thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for giving me the opportunity to host today. And I turn you over, and thank you, Sandy, as well, for your very excellent presentation, as usual. And I turn you over to Joanne for the closing statements. Thank you.
On behalf of the Philippine Infrastructure and Construction Club, I would like to say thank you to Ian Fraser and the GHD team for the very informative presentation, and also to Attorney Dicky Salazar. We will be issuing certificate of attendance to attendees. You can request a copy from me at joanne@picc.com.ph. For upcoming webinars, you can log on to our website, philippineminingclub.com and pacc.com.ph and secondchanceevents.com. Thank you all for being here today and for your continued support of the Philippine Infrastructure and Construction Club. By the way, it is free to join either the club, the Philippine Mining Club, or the Philippine Infrastructure and Construction Club, or both if you wish. And if you would like any information about marketing with, please contact us at info@secondchanceevents.com. You may now turn on your camera for the photo op. Job, over to you.